Hello, everyone. So, in light of the Pet Mods Premier League coming up soon, I kind of wanted to make a video discussing the Paleomons meta because, as it currently stands, there are really only two people who know anything about the mod, those being me and Tanny. And I kind of realized that as nice as it would be to kind of lord over that information and use it to my advantage as a manager this year, I think that would be a little mean to the other players, and I'd like to see a lot of meta development. So I think it would be good to go over everything as it currently exists so that incoming players can sort of have an idea of how things stand and maybe start brainstorming, you know, what could be an interesting new meta option for the tournament. So without further ado, I'll just get right into it. All right, so starting with the S tiers, the first Pokemon I want to talk about is Kabutops. So looking at this thing, I think it can become immediately obvious why it's an S tier. You see Water Poison, you see Regenerator, you think of Toxapex. Now, the stat line doesn't quite line up with what you might expect from a Toxapex-like build. It's a lot more offensive leaning. That 95 speed and 119 special attack are both very impressive, especially the special attack, because Zen Mode Telephagy is not really meta at all. So it's really the highest special attack in the meta, unboosted, which makes Kabutops a very strong offensive threat. You'll often see it running Life Orb sets with, of course, Regenerator, and then its signature move, Bloodstream, which is a very, very strong poison draining move. And then something like Hydro Pump, and then you can run Utility, you can run Rapid Spin, though you usually would not run that with Life Orb. You would probably run it with Black Sludge, or Heavy Duty Boots. But assuming you are running Life Orb, you would probably run something like Hydro Pump, Earth Power, which is really, really good coverage to hit the Pokemon that can switch in on your stabs, and then Flip Turn, which is really, really good pivoting. You pretty much don't want to run a Kabutops set without Flip Turn. It's just such a valuable move, especially to make use of Regenerator. But you can also run more defensive sets that serve as more of a defensive pivot, leveraging that ability. And on that, you would probably still run Bloodstream because it's a very strong move, though you could also run Scald or Hydro Pump. And then you might see Knockoff, and you'll probably see Rapid Spin because Kabutops is probably the most consistent Rapid Spinner or removal option in general in the meta. Now, the other S tier we have right here is Skeledirge. And Skeledirge is really interesting because of how little about it realistically is changed from base. Basically, all that's been changed about it is that Unaware, no, that's the same. Its typing was changed and its defenses were swapped. I also think it received a special attack nerf compared to regular Skeledirge, but that was actually from a balance change and was not in the original submission. However, this Skeledirge can play pretty uniquely. You usually see it running Unaware, you usually see it running Heavy Duty Boots, and you pretty much always, in fact, I would just say you always see Torch Song, because this Skeledirge is kind of a win con, and it can run Draco Meteor, but more often than not, it runs Dragon Pulse, Will-O-Wisp, and Slack Off. And with either fully defensive or with special attack investment, or very occasionally you can even run speed on it, though you really would only want to be doing that to outspeed certain threats. This thing is a menace. It is really, really difficult to break through on the special side because Fire Dragon is a really, really strong specially defensive typing, and 104-100 special bulk is absolutely massive. Meanwhile, on the physical side, this bulk isn't nearly as good, but the thing is that you have access to Will-O-Wisp, which pretty much every physical attacker in the tier hates. Archeops despises it. Alta Combat is destroyed by it. Telephagy doesn't like it. Other options like Physical Yeezult hates it. Venoplura hates it. Very few Pokemon want to eat a burn. And the ones that do, like Tauros Ancestor, is pretty fine with it. But Tauros has really bad longevity, so it's very easy to just hit it a couple times with Skeledirge on the switch in and have it be out of the picture. So basically, Skeledirge is a really, really, really strong, bulky win con and wall that can kind of fill a lot of different roles. It doesn't always fit on every team, but I think part of that might just be that in testing we were trying to make use of every Pokemon. It might be easier to fit it than we realized. But Skeledirge is definitely the top Pokemon to prep for. I think Kabutops often finds itself being answered by just random Pokemon on whatever team you build, whereas Skeledirge kind of needs dedicated counterplay. You definitely want to be considering Skeledirge when you're building. This is easily the most dangerous threat left in the meta. All right, so moving on to the A tiers, we start off A+ with Icaruff. And this, as you might notice from the icon, is actually is a version of Screamtail. We've only done a few of the paradoxes, but this is one of them that we have done. And it doesn't really play very similarly to Screamtail. I'll go into it a little bit. Icaruff is kind of a fast wall. It has really, really nice bulk. It has amazingly high speed. Though one thing I'll get into later is that the speed tiers in Paleomons are kind of whack. Everything is really, really fast on the high end, as you might have noticed from the 2 base 130s and all of these. It's very, 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 very crowded at the high end, so usually high, like mid-speed, speed tiers aren't nearly as impressive here. Kabutops is still good because it outspeeds pretty much every wall, but the problem is that for mons like Servacni and Sigilyph that don't really have much else going for them, these speed tiers hurt them more than they help. So, and base 100 is considered more of like a mid-tier speed level. Anyway, as well as Tauros at 105. So 111 is really impressive, but it's not like speed ceiling level here is basically the point I'm trying to get at. So Icaruff, you can run Thick Fat or Infiltrator. Usually Thick Fat is the way to go. And pretty much always you want to be running heavy duty boots, since it is a defensive flying type. And it can run a lot of different things. It has Boom Burst, Stab, which is really, really, really strong. Even coming off of base 75 special attack, it's still Boom Burst. So that's a really, really, really good option. You can also run its signature move, Soul Wind. And this is really great because Icaruff was kind of designed to beat the ghost spam meta that existed a couple slates ago. And as you might notice, I think ghost is the most common type, with so much representation, including in the top tiers. Pokemon like Caraguana, Tauros, are all very strong. And ghosts were just very, very common in the meta, so Soul Wind serves as a way of beating them really effectively. However, as we'll discuss later, this causes some problems. But defensive Icaruff sets usually fill out the rest of their set with something like Defog and Roost. There are other options you can run. It's pretty reasonable to run Encore with how fast it is. You can get some really cheesy control on opposing Pokemon using that. It also has Perish Song, which hasn't been tried, but I think would be interesting. You can run Roar. It gets Stealth Rock for some reason. I wasn't actually aware of that, but it'd probably be a pretty good rocker, especially as like a hazard lead, combined with like Encore and other stuff. It gets Thunder Wave, which could be effective. It hasn't been tested. It also gets Wish, and only 2 Pokemon in this meta get Wish. If I just look it up really quickly. Only Nurturaptor and Icaruff get Wish. And honestly, I would say they both have their upsides. Nurturaptor is faster and also has access to pivoting. So Wish U-turn is pretty reasonable on it. But the problem is that its HP stat is a lot lower. So Icaruff passes absolutely massive wishes, like absolutely ridiculous. You can see Icaruff right here. Almost nothing in the meta has higher HP than it. And so it can really, really easily heal up teammates like a Lethargy that don't really have reliable recovery. But overall, wish sets haven't really been tested that much, so that's something that we could maybe look into more during the tournament. However, these sets are not what makes Icarus A+ tier. They are good, but there's one move that you might have noticed me glossing over earlier that makes Icarus A+ tier, and that move is Calm Mind. This set is ridiculous. Calm Mind, Boom Burst, Soul Wind, Roost. Because Boom Burst is an extremely strong stab. So strong. And Soul Wind hits ghosts, which are immune to Boom Burst. And one thing you'll notice later on is that steel types in this meta are not very common, and none of them have recovery. Goldoko and Pezbasil are both pretty reasonable defensive steel types, but neither of them have recovery. And they are both also not very specially defensive, Goldoko especially. And rock types are more common, but tend to be more offensive leaning, like Archeops and Rampardos. Bastiodon is the only Pokemon that's like a really bulky rock type. And Bastiodon actually does pretty well into Icarus. The problem is that it also does not have recovery. So basically, this is an extremely bulky Pokemon that gets access to Calm Mind, that gets access to really strong moves to make up for its pretty mediocre special attack. And you can choose to run special attack investment. You can also choose to run bulk, because with Calm Mind, you become basically unbreakable. This is already an extremely good physical wall with very few counterplay options on the physical side. Archeops is a pretty good answer, but Archeops is slower. So once it's boosted a little bit, you can just kill it with Soul Wind. And aside from that, there's not very many options. So Calm Mind Icarus is an extremely dangerous threat. Pokemon like Yeezalt can also serve as pretty good answers, Venuplura as well. But again, you have to be really careful. Venuplura speed ties with it, so you have to watch out for that. And if it's running bulk, especially on the physical side, it can be really hard to break through. And overall, Calm Mind Icarus is a really dangerous set and something you absolutely have to prep for. So next up, we've got two electrics here, but we'll start off with Venuplura. Now, Venuplura is my baby. I love this Pokemon. I made it. It's probably one of my best pet mod submissions of all time. And what's so great about it is it plays really uniquely. So Venuplura has two really good abilities that you can really run either of. Volt Absorb is really nice for the recovery and the electric immunity, allowing it to block Volt switches from Yeezalt. But usually you prefer Poison Touch. And Venuplura often runs, it can run Black Sludge. You can run bulkier sets on Venuplura. You could also run more offensive sets. I wouldn't recommend choice items because its stabs are really easy to shut down with ground types or with steel types. So overall, if you're running more offensive sets, I would still recommend something like Heavy Duty Boots or maybe even still Black Sludge. But because the main way that you're making progress into opposing teams with Venuplura is with Poison Touch. So you're usually running something like Wild Charge, Poison Jab, U-Turn is probably your best move. And then you can fill in this last slot with a lot of different things. Earthquake is really nice coverage. You can also run Strength Sap in order to deny opposing physical Pokemon from switching in. And there's a lot of different things you can run. If you don't care as much about Poison Touch, Gunk Shot is a really strong stab option. And just generally, this Pokemon has a lot it can do. You can even run Toxic Spikes or Spikes on it if you want to have hazards. And it has really nice physical bulk. It has really good speed. Speed tying Icarus, as I mentioned earlier. And it has pretty solid attack. So there's a lot of different things you can do with Venuplura. It's a really flexible Pokemon. And that's kind of what's landed it in A+ tier. It also has really good matchups into some of the top meta Pokemon. If we go over to the VR, it's really good into Yeezalt because it resists both of its stabs and has a really high physical defense to switch into Bolt Beak. And it's also really good into, it can switch into Flying Stab from Swishy Vish, which I'll talk about later. And it's just generally a very effective physical wall. And then next up, we have Yeezalt. So Yeezalt is the Zolt, the Gen 8 fossil with Bolt Beak. And seeing that speed tier, you might be a little spooked because, as we all know, Bolt Beak gets stronger when you move first. Well, thankfully, Bolt Beak is only 1.5 times power if you move first here, so it is definitely still a very strong move, especially with that base 95 physical attack. However, it is not unstoppable. And Yeezolt, you might think it runs Volt Absorb, but it actually gets a custom ability, and that is First Flight. Now, Archeops was the first to have this, but Yeezolt also gets it. And basically what it is it is an air balloon that resets when you switch out. So you are considered airborne, which means you ignore spikes on switch in until you're hit by an attack. So you'll also be immune to ground moves until they hit you with something else, which gives Yeezolt a lot of switch in opportunities that it otherwise would not have. It can switch in pretty safely on, for example, Armaldo, which is a bug ground type. You would not expect an electric type to switch into that, but since you basically get Levitate, you can switch in pretty comfortably. And Yeezolt can run physical or special sets. Both are viable. With a physical set, you would usually see Choice Band, with Bolt Beak being its best attack, and then you might see something like Play Rough. And then the third move is not really guaranteed to be anything. You could run Low Kick. You could run Nuzzle, even Sucker Punch. Usually you'll see U-Turn, but there's not really any guarantees aside from that. You can run a lot of weird different things for different purposes. But on special sets, you would usually see Choice Specs. And instead of these moves, you would see something like Thunderbolt, Moonblast, and here's what really sets special sets apart, Flamethrower and Volt Switch. And that fire coverage is really, really nice, even though your special attack is lower and you don't have Bolt Beak. That fire coverage is really, really strong into a lot of the Pokemon that want to switch into your stabs, right? Because it hits steel types for your fairy attacks. It hits Armaldo for your electric attacks. And yeah. And it's just a generally really strong coverage option. It also hits grass types, which is massive. Gourgeist is a major target for that. It also hits Meganium, who can easily switch into your electric moves. Hemlophosaur is another one, though it's not as defensive leaning, but it does resist both of your stabs, so having Flamethrower for it is very nice. And just generally, these spec sets are really strong with Volt Switch pivoting. They can be really, really hard to slow down. There are options for it. Caraguana is a pretty good counterplay option, as is Caracosta. Kind of funny how that works out. And generally, you will need to play around opposing ground types, but overall, Yeezolt is a really, really strong offensive pivot. So moving on to the A tiers, we will start off with Archeops. Archeops, it has a lot of history. It was added in the 4th slate, I believe, which was pretty early in the mod's history. It was also the first user of First Flight, which I talked about with Yeezolt. And it used to have a lot more attack. It used to have Swords Dance, which it no longer has. It used to have Head Smash, which it also no longer has. And it was ridiculously strong. Thankfully, over time, it's been toned down quite a bit. You can see this stat line is no longer nearly as impressive, though it is still very good. And usually what you'll see on Archeops, the most standard set is Choice Band. You have First Flight, you have Stone Edge, you have Close Combat, easily your most spammable attack. You have something like Knockoff, which is really important for hitting switch-ins like Caraguana and Alephagy, and you have U-Turn. You can also run other things. You can run Earthquake pretty easily, but otherwise this is generally what you would expect to see from Archeops. And this set is very good. It's bread and butter, very easy to use, but you can also run other things. You can run Life Orb with Bulk Up, and this set can also get a lot of mileage into opposing teams, especially into bulkier teams, because that setup really allows you to boost past Pokemon that might otherwise be kind of annoying for you. such as Caraguana. Or you can run even bulkier sets have been experimented with heavy-duty boots and maybe something like Roost. Oh, wait, it doesn't get Roost. Well, I lied. But it is still nice. Sorry, not with heavy-duty boots. I'm kind of all over the place right now. With leftovers, since you resist rocks, so there's not really any point. Oh, right. The reason is you basically get heavy-duty boots from First Flight, since that has that levitate effect. And since you resist stealth rocks, leftovers is pretty much always getting you recovery each turn. It's really, really, really strong on it. So you can run something like this and have it be a more defensive set, be pivoting around a lot. It's still like an offensive pivot, but your bulk is pretty reasonable, so you can eat hits and kind of, make things happen. And those leftovers are constantly giving you recovery, giving you a lot more longevity. This is a really, really nice set to use. Actually, let me just check something really quickly. Am I crazy? Okay. I could have sworn in testing we were using recovery on this thing, but it would appear that I am just insane. Well, that's cool. Regardless, this is still a very strong set. There's a lot of things that you can do with Archeops. There's a lot more experimentation that can be done with this mon, especially with switching up its coverage options. And generally, yeah, Archeops is a really, really strong offensive pivot and physical wall breaker. So moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is Crobat here. Crobat is completely different in a lot of ways from how it functions in base. It is a very, very fast special attacker. And its signature ability, Night Watch, gives it 1.5 times power against dark types, which makes dark types not very consistent switch-ins, which is pretty scary when your dark pulses are some of your best attacks. So you'll usually see Dark Pulse, Earth Power, U-Turn, and then this last slot is pretty flexible. You can run Cross Poison, since it no longer has access to Sludge Bomb. You can consider running Cross Poison mainly to hit Gourgeist, who otherwise kind of stonewalls you. But you can also just run something like Roost for a lot of longevity. And you can experiment with other options as well. There's a lot of different things you can run. You can try Defog. You can try Heat Wave if you really, really want coverage. You can try something like Spikes. It's a very, very fast spiker with access to taunt as well, so there's a lot you can do there. Or you can try running Toxic to try and hit some of the switch-ins, such as Gourgeist. And your item slot is really, really flexible. You generally want to run this EV spread, though you can also run a bulkier set, depending on the situation. But for an item, you can run Life Orb very easily. You can run Leftovers very easily. There's a lot you can do with this Pokemon, and it's very versatile, and that is why it is an A+ tier, or sorry, an A tier mon. Next up, I will be talking about each of the Gourgeist forms individually, as despite sharing a type and move pool, they do play very differently. And this one right here is Gourgeist Small. So Gourgeist Small is a very, very fast offensive setup sweeper with Fairy Aura. And you'll usually see it running something like Life Orb with Swords Dance, Power Whip, Play Rough, and then coverage of choice, usually high horsepower. And this can easily clean up weakened teams. It can even cleave through pretty strong teams, assuming they don't have the right counterplay. Because Gourgeist is very, very fast. It is approaching the speed ceiling of the meta, and it is very easily able to one-shot pretty much everything slower than it, aside from dedicated walls, once it hits +2 with Swords Dance. So this is definitely something you need to be prepared for when you're building, as it is a very strong option, especially on more offensive teams. And then finally, for the A tier, we have Swishyvish. So this is the counterpart to Yeezult. This is the Vicious Rend user, which again is also nerfed to only have 1.5 times power if you move first. Still a very strong option, but not as strong as it would otherwise be. And the interesting thing about Swishy Fish is it gets Aerolate. And it used to get Double Edge. Thankfully, it no longer has that, but it does have Body Slam. So what you'll usually see on this Pokemon is Vicious Rend, Body Slam, Filler, and Flip Turn. And usually with the Choice Band item, though I have also seen Scarf do well. I've also seen Heavy Duty Boots do well. It kind of just depends on what you need for your team. And this thing is an absolute menace because there are not many walls in the meta that can effectively switch into these stabs. There is Swampert as a very good option. There is Belly Bolt as a not very good option. But outside of Swampert, really, most teams are forced to predict into this Pokemon with their switch-ins, as they'll usually have a flying resist and a water resist, but not one that is able to eat both of these attacks very effectively. And so you can also run Psychic Fangs as a way of hitting Kabutops mainly, though there are other defensive poison types, such as Venipleura, who is also really annoying for your flying type attacks, and Omastar, who is just really, really bulky. So Psychic Fangs is really nice for hitting those. As well as, what else is Psychic Fangs strong into? It also hits... Okay, yeah, that's basically it. But the fact is that this slot doesn't really matter because you're basically never clicking it. You can also run Crunch if you want to. You can even run Defog if you're crazy. But aside from that, you can run Stone Edge. There's a lot of things that you can run on this Pokemon. But generally what matters is these three moves: Vicious Rend, Body Slam, Flip Turn. These are the core of Swishy Vicious strategy. It is a button clicker, and it does it really, really well. So now we're on the A- tiers, and we will start off with Cariguana. So Cariguana is, I believe, the first Pokemon we've talked about that is a dedicated wall. It has amazing physical defense, it has pretty solid special bulk as well, and it has a really nice defensive ability in Wandering Spirit, which is really useful for stealing the abilities of some strong Pokemon. If you're lucky, you can steal Kabutops' Regenerator, but it's also good for stealing First Flight from Yeezolt and Archeops in order to hit them with your Earth Power. But generally what you'll want to run on this is something like Leftovers with Wandering Spirit, Earth Power, and then you do not have access to Wisp even though you're a Ghost type. So usually you'll run something like Shadow Ball, Stealth Rock, and Slack Off. And this is the most standard set. You usually want to run physically defensive, as without it you can sort of struggle into mainly knockoff, but especially knockoff coming from Archeops, who you are one of the best answers to, so usually physical defense is good for that. But you can also run specially defensive if you care a lot about beating Yeezolt. Now, this is a pretty standard, easy to understand Pokemon. There's a lot of potential, like, developments and interesting tech that could happen with this. I'd be really interested to see if anyone tries Hex with Toxic. I'm not sure how viable that is, but you do have Earth Power to hit Steels and Poison types, so it could be interesting. You also get Toxic Spikes, which there are a lot of Poison types in this meta, but there are also a lot of interesting Toxic Spikes users, so definitely a unique strategy to play around with if you're interested. And generally, there's, a lot you can do with this Pokemon, but overall, it's a pretty standard wall. So next up, we have Elephagy. And don't let the search bar fool you here. This thing does not run Zen mode. That is purely a flavor addition. What you want to be running on this is Rough Skin. And this is indeed the Great Tusk of the meta, literally. There's an actual Great Tusk of the meta, Brawlutra, but we'll talk about it later. So this is a Psychic Fighting type with really, really nice bulk, very, very high physical offense, and a fine enough speed tier. So usually what you'll run on this is something like Leftovers and a more offensive spread. You do not have Rapid Spin, which does make you different from Great Tusk pretty notably. But what you do have is its signature move, Ivory Slash. And this is a really, really interesting form of setup, as every time you use it, it raises your crit rate, and this does reset on switch out, but as long as you're staying in, you can reach guaranteed crit after only clicking this 3 times. So, and it's also just a generally fine, reasonable power level attack. But Ivory Slash combined with Close Combat means that you can raise your crit rate with Ivory Slash and then crit with Close Combat and knock out like 2/3 of the meta with just that alone. And then you also have Knockoff. You have coverage options like Ice Spinner or various other moves. I mean, it's Great Tusk's move pool, so there's a lot you can do here. Or you can just run Stealth Rock. And Alephagy is a very reasonable stealth rocker. It's pretty effective at that role. And you can run bulkier sets on this, or you can run it more offensive leaning, and both are pretty good. And the Rough Skin ability is really nice in combination with its typing in order to give it a really good matchup into Archeops. And generally, it has a lot of switch-in opportunities against physical attackers, though you do have to be careful of Swishy Vish and Tauros, which both have strong stab options that are super effective against you. But aside from them, Alephagy is a pretty good tank, and potentially a win con depending on how lucky you get with Ivory Slash crits. So next up, I've mentioned it a couple times already, so let's talk about Tauros. Now, I don't know if y'all saw this earlier. Tauros has Guerrilla Tactics, which is a crazy ability, and is also the reason why it only has 60 attack. Because this thing hits like a truck. With a Choice Band or potentially a Choice Scarf, both are viable. Choice Scarf makes it outspeed pretty much everything, but Choice Band makes it absolutely nuclear with its damage output. You'll usually run something like Flare Blitz, Raging Bull, which is Ghost type on this Tauros, and is also your most effective Ghost stab. And then usually something like Earthquake, which is your best coverage. And then the last slot is pretty flexible. You can run Throat Chop to hit mainly Cardantis, which is not a super relevant Pokemon. Or you can run Stone Edge to hit Icaruff, which is a lot more relevant, and you probably want to be running that because otherwise you get stonewalled by Icaruff. And aside from that, it's a pretty flexible Pokemon. There's a lot of things you can do with these slots, which is interesting because I don't think you would expect it to be flexible seeing this ability, but there is kind of a lot of things you can do with it. Choice Scarf serves as really nice speed control, and its speed tier is not very impressive on its own, but it's high enough to outspeed most defensive Pokemon. And the other thing that's really, really nice about Tauros is that fire typing, giving it a Wisp immunity. There are quite a few burn spreaders in this meta, so having that fire typing can make you a pretty solid switch into a lot of them. I know I mentioned Skeledirge earlier. You can definitely come in and Earthquake that and scare it out, which is really, really nice. But there's other Pokemon as well. Just looking at Will-O-Wisp distribution, there are all of these Dracomizer, Physical Wall, Aerodactyl, Physical Wall, Cardantis, really good Physical Bulk. All of these could potentially run Wisp and be a nuisance. So it's definitely nice to have a Pokemon like Tauros, which doesn't care about that. So next up, we have Tyrantrum. And I'm going to talk about this pretty similarly to how I talked about Gourgeist Small, because this basically does one thing. You run Life Orb on it, you run Strongjaw, and you run Dragon Dance. And it gets a signature biting move, Draconic Rend, which is similar to Vicious Rend and Bolt Beak, but does not activate when you move first. It's only when the opponent is switching, which honestly doesn't matter that much because it's still really, really strong. It can be very, very hard to switch into this Pokemon. And you also, especially when you combine that with Crunch and its very, very deep coverage move pool, there is so many options you can run on this. You can run Close Combat for Dark types. You can run Earthquake, which is just really good coverage. You can run Fire Fang. You can run Psychic Fangs, which combined with Strongjaw is 130 base power just about, I think. Insanely strong. There are so many reasonable coverage options you can run on this. I personally prefer Earthquake mainly to hit Golduko and Skeledirge, but it is really flexible as a Pokemon, and there's a lot of different things you can do with it, but generally it is a setup sweeper and win con, and it is very, very good at that job. You also have shockingly high bulk on the physical side. 82, 129 is ridiculous. And that enables you to live a lot of hits that you might not expect this thing to live. You can even potentially eat a U-turn or two, which is shocking. And so, yeah, generally Tyrantrum is a really, really good setup sweeper. And for the final Pokemon in A- tier, this is one of my favorite Pokemon in the meta. I didn't like it back when it won, but it has really grown on me. This is Ungabungus, which is our Brute Bonnet. This Pokemon plays really, really interestingly. So the first thing you'll notice is that this gets neutralizing gas. And in this meta, there are a lot of Pokemon that rely on their abilities or get a lot of value out of them. Even out of the ones I've mentioned so far, you have Kabutops with Regenerator, Skeledirge with Unaware. You have Venoplura with its Poison Touch. You have Yeezle with First Flight. There's so many Pokemon here that rely on their abilities. Swishyvish with Aerolate. Without Aerolate, that thing's Body Slam is hitting like a wet noodle. It is really, really massive. Tauros as well. Tauros, Ungabungus is just a hard wall to Tauros because it simply cannot do anything into you without Guerrilla Tactics, especially with you being a Dark type and resisting Raging Bull and having such a nice physical bulk. This Pokemon is a really, really cool tank, and it plays really interestingly. So, to talk a bit about that, you can do a lot of different things with Ungabungus. It is pretty reasonable to run a more defensive set with something like Knockoff, maybe Close Combat for coverage, maybe Sucker Punch. It gets some really interesting utility options. You can run Toxic pretty well. You can also run High Horsepower if you want to hit Steels and Poison types, such as Kabutops. You can run Synthesis pretty easily. Though I honestly, depending on the situation, I can drop Synthesis on this even when I want it to eat hits, just because you don't always need it. You can run Leech Seed, and a really interesting option on this Pokemon, which I'll also talk about with offensive sets, is it gets Obstruct. Which, for those of you who don't know what that move does, this is Obstagoon's signature move, and it is a Protect move that also gives the opponent -2 defense if they make contact with you, which Ungabungus has base 117 attack, which is really high. So even on more defensive sets with this, if you have Obstruct and something like Knockoff or Close Combat or High Horsepower or especially Sucker Punch, you can do insane things into opposing physical attackers. Now, unfortunately, some of the better physical attackers do resist Dark, such as Archeops and Yeezle, but you can still get away with some insane plays with Ungabungus. It's a really fun Pokemon to use. And the last thing I want to mention with it is you can also run more offensive sets with something like Black Glasses, Knockoff, Close Combat, High Horsepower, potentially, and Sucker Punch especially. It is a really, really good user of Sucker Punch. And then I really like running Obstruct on it because it screws over people who think they can just attack into you, because Obstruct plus Sucker Punch can take out a lot of weakened attackers and just generally make it really awkward for the opponent to play around you. Obstruct is really nice. You might have noticed I've mentioned a lot of choice item abusers already. Obstruct is really nice for scouting into things like Yeezle and Archeops, who might be able to hit you with one of their attacks, but not so much with the other ones. Ungabungus is just a really interesting Pokemon that's really, really effective at whatever role you want it to do. All right, moving on to the B tiers, let's start off B+ with Aurorus. Now, this is a Pokemon that was definitely used a lot more back in the day. It hasn't been used as commonly recently, but it's definitely still really good at what it does. So you'll usually, Thick Fat is a pretty solid option. Since you are a Dragon type, it removes your ice weakness, but usually what you want to be running is its signature ability, Spectorate. And this is just a Ghost type Refrigerate clone, pretty simple to understand. And it enables you to run a really, really strong set. Nasty Plot, Draco Meteor, Hyper Voice, and Recover. And this is the most standard Aurorus set. It is a very, very effective tank and bulky setup mon. You can run a little bit of speed on it to outspeed certain walls, but you can also just run full bulk and take advantage of its really, really impressive natural bulk in order to cleave through opposing teams. Dragon Ghost are really, really hard stabs to resist. I don't think there's anything in the meta that resists both of them. Looking here at the fairy types, yeah, there aren't. There is nothing that resists both of your stabs, which is really, really nice, especially with those really strong Draco Meteors. And I mentioned the steel types not really having recovery, and most of the fairy types in this meta are offensive. So this is just a very, very nice, bulky offensive mon. It can do a lot of things for you. I think there's definitely a lot more experimentation that could happen with this, because we've pretty much only seen these nasty plot sets. But for one thing, you could start running Dragon Pulse to not have that drop from Draco Meteor, which might make Nasty Plot a little bit better as a sweeping set. There's also interesting coverage options it gets, though I don't know how important they really are. And it also can be maybe run as more of a defensive Pokemon. You have Toxic, you have Thunderwave, you have interesting utility options, you have Haze, you could potentially run Hex, especially with Thick Fat. And you do have Calm Mind if you want to go for more of a bulkier setup route. I definitely think Aurorus is a Pokemon that could use a lot more experimentation. It's something that hasn't necessarily been played around with as much as it could potentially be. So I look forward to seeing this Pokemon being used in the tournament. Next up, we have Carracosta, which I know it is a little confusing to have two Pokemon whose names start with Car. Good luck. Caraguana and Carracosta were actually also both submitted by the same person, which was me. So I guess you can blame me for that if you want to. But to talk about the Pokemon itself, we have Carracosta, which is a dark poison type. And the first thing I do want to mention is it does learn Shell Smash, but it's not a good Shell Smasher. It is really, really slow, far too slow to abuse Shell Smash effectively. If you want to do it, I mean, you can try. It has some pretty good stab options. Like, you can run Gunk Shot, you can run Knockoff, you can run Earthquake for coverage. Like, yeah, this is probably fine. Like, you could maybe make this work, maybe on like a screens team. I don't recommend it, though. But overall, what you really want to run Carracosta for is this amazing, amazing defensive profile. You have extremely good special bulk. You have a pretty respectable 108 attack stat. You have workable physical bulk, and you have this signature ability, Leatherback, which is sort of like Motor Drive, but it raises your special defense instead of your speed. It's a really, really nice option in blocking, especially Yeezolt. That's a very good answer to Yeezolt. You resist Fairy, and you are completely immune to Electric, and you don't really care about that Flamethrower coverage if it's running special sets. And you can just run something like Black Sludge. You can run Knockoff. Carracosta is probably the most consistent knocker in the entire meta. It is really, really hard to get off the field, and it can just knock off items from 2 or 3 of the opponent's Pokemon on one switch in. It's really, really nice at that. And Gunk Shot is really strong off of that high base attack, and that 30% chance to poison comes up a lot more often than you would think, with how many times this Pokemon has the opportunity to click it. And then you can run Stealth Rock. You can run Rapid Spin, but usually you won't be running Rapid Spin on this, mainly because of its signature move, Trash Compactor, which for some reason you can't search for in the team builder. So this is definitely something you might want to watch this video to gain knowledge of, because you will have to scroll down and you can click on it here. And what Trash Compactor does is it restores 25% of your max HP, kind of like Life do. However, if hazards are on your side of the field, it recovers 50%, which makes it 16 PP recovery, which it does the same amount as recovers, the same amount as slack off, makes it a very, very consistent option as long as you have Stealth Rock, Spikes, or whatever else on your side of the field. And this is super nice on Carracosta, because as I've already mentioned, your defensive profile is really, really good. And so having that recovery on top of this already great bulk makes you an extremely effective wall. And even the 25% recovery, depending on who you're up against, if you're into a Yeezolt or into a Meganium, they really can't touch you. So you can just click that 25% and still be net positive on HP. It's a really fun move to use. It requires you to be a bit strategic with when you remove hazards and when you potentially want to keep them on the field. And then generally this last slot will be your own Stealth Rocks. Just because Carracosta is, again, a pretty effective rocker. It stays on the field for a long time. There's definitely other moves you could run. It does get Scald. I don't think it would be a very good Pokemon to use Scald on, but it also gets Toxic Spikes if you want to try those. And yeah, it's generally a very flexible, bulky Pokemon. Next up, we have Cradily. I don't like Cradily very much. I'll be completely honest. This Pokemon is annoying to face because it has Poison Heal. And I'm sure anyone with who's played in a meta with Gliscor knows exactly why bulky Poison Heal is really, really annoying to deal with. Thankfully, this Pokemon's bulk used to be a lot higher. It is now much, much lower, which helps a lot with dealing with it, but it is still a menace. And usually what you'll see this running, it's actually kind of hard to predict what Cradily will run. It has a lot of moves it can use, and it kind of just sits around, so it has a lot of opportunities to click a lot of different things. But some moves you should definitely be wary of are its signature move, Storm Surge, which also cannot be searched in the builder for some reason. I'll definitely talk to my coder to see if that can be fixed for that, as well as Trash Compactor, and if there's any others that have this problem. But until then, just bear in mind that there may be some moves that you will not be able to search for in the builder, and you will have to go in and click them manually. All of this is listed on the spreadsheet, so if you need any more information on signature moves and who learns them, the spreadsheet is a great resource for that. But here we have Storm Surge, which is basically a clone of Make It Rain, a water type special attack that lowers your special attack by 1 when you use it. It's a very strong move, especially coming off of that base 108 special attack. Definitely not something you could just laugh off, though usually Cradily is not running offensive investment, so it's not as scary as it may otherwise be. You also do have to watch out for, it does not get Synthesis, thankfully. I lied, it gets Synthesis. Well, you may have to watch out for that. But honestly, it doesn't really run Synthesis because it's so much more annoying to run Leech Seed and Protect on this thing. These two together give you so much longevity, so much passive damage on your opponents. It's an absolute menace to deal with. Can you tell I don't like facing this Pokemon very much? It can also run Stabs, it can run Sludge Bomb, which is really annoying because it hits the grass types that will want to switch in on these two moves. It has weird options like Strength Sap, which is obnoxious. Swords Dance, which you wouldn't think it would run Swords Dance, but 88 attack is not that bad. And when you have so many free turns, you can just click this a couple times, and then with Liquidation or Power Whip, you can just cleave through opposing teams. It's actually something you have to watch out for. This is the kind of Pokemon that does kind of warp the meta a little bit. It is possible to deal with without one of these, but generally you're going to be wanting to run an offensive poison or flying type to deal with it. Its bulk is not infinite, especially if you have set up Pokemon, you can deal with it in other ways. Or you can just U-turn spam to deal with it as well, since it is weak to U-turn. But having something like Caracosta or Kabutops or Venuplura is going to make your life a whole lot easier into this. Or Squishyvish as well is a very, very good answer to it. As well as potentially Ultra Combat. Icaruff is fine with Soul Wind, though it may not be dealing enough damage to outdamage Poison Heal, especially with Leech Seed and Protect. And generally, this is just a really, really annoying Pokemon to deal with. Very, very good on more defensive teams, and definitely something you want to be prepared for. Though it can also struggle into certain matchups, especially if the opponent has a Kabutops that can just keep switching in over and over and over and clicking Bloodstream, because that's not the easiest move to switch into, and giving that Pokemon free switch-ins is definitely really annoying for the Cradily user. But overall, definitely a major threat, definitely something you have to consider when you're building. Next up, we have Moscourge. And this Pokemon's really fun to use. It has 3 good abilities with Corrosion, Poison Touch, Merciless, though being a special attacker, you don't usually want to run Poison Touch on it, and its best ability is probably Corrosion. Now, when you look at this Pokemon and you look at this kit, you're probably reminded of Salazzle. It does also get Nasty Plot, which kind of drives the connection home. However, the difference between this thing and Salazzle is that, unlike Salazzle, you actually kind of want to run Toxic on this, because Toxic with Corrosion here enables you to deal with pretty much anything that can switch into you otherwise. Because no poison type can come in for fear of corrosion. Caracosta gets poisoned. It absolutely hates that. Kabutops gets poisoned. Omastar doesn't really switch in anyway. And then steel types as well, like Goldoko, also hates getting poisoned. So Toxic is actually really, really nice here. It also hits Pokemon like Icaruff, of course, though you don't need corrosion for that. But again, getting a poison on that thing is pretty much a death sentence for it. So Mosscourge is a really, really, really good stall breaker. It deals well with a lot of what bulkier teams want to run. It also is an offensive poison type, which means that Credilli cannot switch into it, which is great for that corrosion toxic, because Credilli is really the only Pokemon that actually wants to eat that. So being able to hit it really effectively with your stab is awesome. And generally, there's a lot of different things you can run item-wise. You can run Life Orb, you can run Black Sludge. It's a pretty flexible slot, but this is generally the moveset you're going to see. You could also potentially try running choice items on it. I don't think it would be very good, mainly because you lose that ability to use that corrosion toxic as effectively. And Nasty Plot on this is generally really threatening because at +2, you can deal with a lot of the meta really, really well. You can break through a lot of walls, especially with that ghost typing, because a lot of strong walls are weak to ghost, like Aerodactyl and Caraguana. So overall, this is generally what you want to run with it. And yeah, very effective stall breaker, but it also does well into offense with that Nasty Plot and that Toxic. And the final Pokemon here in the B+ tier is Rampardos. Now, this Pokemon would be rated a lot higher if Archeops did not exist, because there is a ton of role overlap between the two. And generally, Archeops is more effective on most teams. It's easier to slot. However, Rampardos does have quite a few upsides. So the first thing to mention with Rampardos is its signature ability, Head Barrage. And this is a really interesting ability. All of its special moves become physical, but also gain 25% recoil. So what this means is with, for example, a Choice Scarf, you can run Head Smash, you can run Moon Blast, which is stronger than Play Rough, and is also physical thanks to Head Barrage. And then you get an absurd amount of coverage. Like, I can't even begin to mention everything. There's Earthquake, which doesn't have the recoil, but if you want to get into recoil territory, you have Ice Beam, you have Fire Blast, you have Thunderbolt, you have Surf. There is so much special coverage that this thing can run. Generally, what I prefer is something like Fire Blast and then Earthquake, because it hits most of the meta with those, especially because generally you're going to be clicking Head Smash and Moonblast. Choice Scarf is probably your best item. Make sure to set the EVs manually on this, because the builder wants to give you special attack investment, but you don't need that thanks to Head Barrage. But generally, something like this, or potentially Adamant as well, can also work. And you just click your attacks, you do insane damage with that 130 base attack. I mean, it's a Rampardos, what would you expect? And you can easily cleave through opposing teams with this perfect coverage. There's not really anything that stops this effectively. The main thing holding it back is definitely its speed tier. Though there are Pokemon, if you predict well into it, Rampardos doesn't have the greatest longevity, especially with that recoil from Head Barrage and Head Smash. Those two together definitely wear it down pretty quickly. It has solid enough bulk with that 117 base HP, so you can generally eat weak hits, U-turns, and knockoffs and the like. But for the most part, you definitely don't want this thing to just be eating random attacks. You want to use it as more of a wall breaker that doesn't really take much damage. And the only real thing holding this back compared to something like Archeops is that it's a little harder to use. You have to kind of enable it a little bit more. You have to give it switch-in opportunities, and its speed isn't as high. But overall, Rampardos is a massive threat. And one thing I'll mention with it is it actually works really well with Archeops on a team. The two of them together kind of cover each other's checks, and they can easily overload and overwhelm opposing defensive teams, defensive cores. So definitely something to look out for. There are a lot of effective teams that have used the two together. And yeah, generally Rampardos is a really strong Pokemon. All right, now on to the B tiers. We'll start off with Armaldo. We're definitely getting to the point now where these Pokemon are a little less effective at what they do. They're a little less meta relevant. They won't always appear on as many teams, so I won't have as much to say about them, and definitely keep in mind that whatever roles they do have going for them, they might have pretty major flaws in those roles. I'll try to mention them as we go along, but this being a viability ranking, that's kind of how it goes. So starting off with Armaldo, this Pokemon it has a lot of interesting tools. There aren't that many ground types in the meta, and a lot of them kind of do similar things. Like Brawlutra and Armaldo are pretty similar. Caraguana was just recently added, and it's the first like real defensive ground type with recovery. Before that, people were running defensive Crobat, which was not very good. And then Sigilyph isn't really meta relevant at the moment. So these four are the only ground types, and Armaldo is definitely the best one among them for utility. You can run Leftovers. I've also had success with Assault Vest on it, because it's really good at eating special attacks from Pokemon like Yeezolt. I've mentioned that Pokemon so much, but it's just very relevant, so that's how it goes. And you can run Intimidate. You can also run Tough Claws if you want to run a more offensive set. But the big issue with Tough Claws is that it doesn't boost Earthquake, which is your best attack. Tough Claws boosted U-Turn is definitely a very fun button to click, but not boosting Earthquake does kind of remove some of the X factor there. So Intimidate is really, really nice on it. It helps you switch in really well to physical Pokemon. It's kind of like a Landorus Therian type with that 95, 110 physical bulk, very impressive. And 110 attack is also really good. So you'll usually see it running Earthquake, you'll usually see it running U-Turn, you'll usually see it running Knockoff. Armaldo is pretty good as a knocker. And then it's kind of variable what you run in this last slot. I personally like running Stone Edge. I think it's nice to hit flying types like Aerodactyl and Icaruff, who are otherwise kind of a nuisance for you. But you can also, if you're not running Assault Vest, if you're running Leftovers, you can pretty easily run Stealth Rock on this. You can also run this as a Rapid Spinner, which is really, really nice. This set can be really hard to stop if they don't have an Icaruff, and even if they do have an Icaruff, you're knocking off its boots, which is definitely a nuisance for it. If you combine that with a Rocker, this can be a really effective Pokemon at controlling the hazard game. And you can also run both Rapid Spin and Stealth Rock, though I'd personally recommend against it because I think it makes you a little bit too passive. Though Earthquake and U-Turn are definitely very strong moves, as is Knockoff. You can definitely try running something like Knockoff, U-Turn, Stealth Rock, Rapid Spin, but I think at that point we're approaching worst mon on team territory. So be careful with that. Next up is another of my favorite Pokemon, Bastiodon. This Pokemon is really, really fun to play. It's not that good. It was recently buffed, so it's a lot more consistent. And it has really interesting matchups into the meta, similar to Ungabungus, because of its ability Magic Bounce. So first off, the first thing I'll mention, Bastiodon is the single best Skeledirge answer in the meta, period. Hands down, there's nothing else that compares, because you have Magic Bounce for Wisp, you have Fairy type, which makes you immune to its Dragon move, and you have Rock, which makes you resist Torch Song, and you have insanely high bulk, which makes it so that you can kind of just freely switch into even like a +2 Skeledirge and easily 1v1 it, especially because you have Petroglyph, which is a Rock type move, 80 base power, not super impressive, but it's enough to deal major damage to Skeledirge, and most importantly, that 16 PP means that you can stall out its recovers, or its slack-offs, which means, for one, Skeledirge can't stay in on you forever, and for two, this thing is raising your special attack by 1 every single time you use it, which means when that Skeledirge switches out, if it stayed in for quite a while, you now have like a +4 or a +5 Bastiodon clicking this 80 base power Rock move that is just going to absolutely nuke one of your opponent's Pokemon with that base 107 special attack. This Pokemon's really fun to run. Magic Bounce is really funny for denying opposing hazards especially. It does not have Moonblast, but it does have Dazzling Gleam. So generally you're going to run Petroglyph, Dazzling Gleam, Earth Power, and then there's kind of two options depending on how you want to run the Pokemon. I generally run Stealth Rock in the last slot. I think it's a pretty good rocker, especially with Magic Bounce denying opposing hazards. And a lot of the rapid spinners don't like staying in on you, because Kabutops, you eat a hit from that and Earth Power it and do like 80, and it's crazy, especially if you're at +1 for Petroglyph. I'm pretty sure hitting Kabutops on the switch in with Petroglyph and then clicking Earth Power knocks out even bulkier sets, which is very funny. You'll usually want to run Leftovers because this doesn't have any other form of recovery. You can also consider running Calm Mind. I personally think that with Petroglyph, it's not necessary to run Calm Mind, and you often don't benefit from the special defense boost because Rock Fairy is a typing that has a lot of weaknesses, which means it's very easy for opponents to deal really high amounts of damage to you. So generally, you're going to want to click the more offensive move that gives you immediate value than something like Calm Mind that requires more setup opportunities and just it's more inconsistent. So overall, this is probably the best Bastiodon set. You can run more bulk than this. You can also run max special attack because, oh boy, is this thing a menace with max special attack. It can just tear through opposing teams. People don't expect it coming from a Bastiodon, which I understand, but oh boy, will they need to learn. This Pokemon is very, very fun and can be really, really nice on the right teams. Next up, finally, we have our first Steel type, which is absolutely insane considering we have gone all the way down to the B tier and we're only now getting to one. But this meta is not very Steel heavy, as you may have noticed from Bastiodon being usable at all, among others. But the first Steel we do have is Golduko. And this Pokemon is really interesting because of its access to Good as Gold. This is a very strong ability, as we all know. It makes it immune to Will-O-Wisp, which is really, really nice for dealing with whispers such as Aerodactyl, and not so much Skeledirge. You can't really switch in effectively on Skeledirge, which is definitely a big knock on Golduko. But what you can switch in on is Defog, which means, again, you're really, really strong into Aerodactyl, who is one of the better defoggers. You're also really, really good into Icaruff, which can't really hit you effectively and can't defog against you. And the other thing that's nice about Golduko is that it has Stealth Rock. So you'll usually run something like Iron Head, Earthquake, and Stealth Rock. And this Stealth Rock is unremovable by defoggers. Rapid Spinners can, of course, remove it. However, some of the best Rapid Spinners hate Earthquake. Kabutops gets melted by Earthquake because Golduko has a absolutely massive 135 attack. I think that's the single highest attack stat in the meta. Yep, it is. Even higher than Rampardos. So Golduko does insane damage, even if you don't have attack investment, though I personally like running attack investment on it. But you can definitely run bulkier sets if you want to. And then the last slot on Golduko isn't super, like, it's pretty free. You could run something like Swords Dance. You could run Volt Switch, which is an interesting option as pivoting on this, though grounds are pretty liable to switch in on you, especially something like Armaldo. So it's not always the best option. What I really like running in this last slot is Rapid Spin. This Pokemon actually pretty effectively runs Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin on the same set, because with that 135 attack, that Stab Iron Head, and the Earthquake coverage, it's pretty hard to switch into with just those two. So you can run Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin. And the nice thing about Rapid Spin is it also boosts your speed, which can start getting pretty dangerous after 2 or 3 spins. You'll start outspeeding faster offensive Pokemon, and it's definitely something you have to watch out for. So overall, Golduko definitely has its flaws. Its bulk isn't great on the special side, so Pokemon like Yeezolt can really take advantage of it, which is really unfortunate because you would want it to be a Yeezolt switch-in, but it just doesn't really do that job very well. But Golduko is still a really good rocker. Good as Gold is very interesting for blocking defog, as well as ignoring status, which there are a lot of status spreaders in the meta, so that's really good. And then Rapid Spin is really, really nice. So next up, we have our second Gourgeist form. And this one, I need a second to think about, because their sprites all look very similar. But this one is Gourgeist Large. So Gourgeist Large is basically has one thing that makes it appealing, and that is Grassy Surge. It is I believe, the only terrain setter in the meta. So this grassy terrain is uncontested as of right now, and that is really, really nice because you can run it with something like Alta Combat, who does not have access to Brave Bird. I'll mention it later, but Acrobatics is its best flying move. So running Grassy Seed with Acrobatics and Close Combat and Sword Stance is really nice on it. And there's just a lot of setup mons, including ones I've mentioned already, that benefit from Grassy Seed. Tyrantrum loves it. Auroras loves it. You unfortunately cannot run the other Gorgeists, though Small would be really, really good on a grassy terrain team, so it's probably fine that you can't. But Meganium appreciates the grassy terrain boost, Hemlophosaur as well. There's just a lot of Pokemon that really appreciate Grassy Surge offensively, but it's also really good defensively. As I've mentioned, a lot of walls don't have access to recovery that's reliable. Stuff like Bastiodon, Goldoco, Alephagy. So even though being good, really defensive mons, they don't have that longevity that you would like from them. So grassy terrain helps a lot with that and makes them a lot more effective. I think especially with Goldoco, you will have to run high horsepower on it, but it's still really effective on grassy terrain teams. And Bastiodon as well is just made so much better by grassy terrain teams. The other nice thing about Grassy Surge is it weakens ground moves, and ground is a really, really common coverage option in this meta. So Gorgeist on its own, not really impressive. The stats, very mediocre. You can run all sorts of things on it. I like Terrain Extender. You can also run Leftovers. And generally, you want to run something like Nasty Plot with some combination of Moonblast, maybe it doesn't get Leaf Storm, but you can consider Energy Ball. You can also consider Giga Drain, which boosted by grassy terrain is a very, very strong option. You also have Flamethrower, which is really nice as coverage. And you also have Toxic, which is actually really useful to hit a lot of the Pokemon that usually want to switch in on you. Toxic is really, really nice, in particular for jump scaring Skeledirge, because you're a grass fairy type, so Skeledirge switches in on you pretty well. But with Toxic, you completely cripple Skeledirge. Toxic is Skeledirge's biggest weakness, and so that random Toxic can get you some crazy value out of your Gorgeist, which is otherwise not really doing much besides setting grassy terrain. So overall, this Pokemon has a lot of set variety, but overall nothing it does is all that impressive. The biggest thing about it is that Grassy Surge, because grassy terrain is just very, very strong in this meta. And finally, for the B tier, we have Swampert. Swampert's a pretty cool Pokemon. You can do a lot of different things with it. You'll notice here that its stat line is pretty across the board good, aside from its speed. Pretty much everything is very high. The attack doesn't really matter for the most part, because you're generally going to run special sets on it. But one set that I have had a lot of success with is Assault Vest with Gooey, which, not super relevant, can come in handy occasionally. And then I'll run Hydro Pump, Volt Switch, Knockoff, which Swampert gets, and that actually does use that 91 base attack, which is nice, and Sludge Wave, which is really, really nice coverage to hit grass types, and generally a nuisance, especially for Yeezolt, who hates that powerful Sludge Wave, means that it can't just pivot around you for free. If it comes in, it has to risk eating a hit that'll pretty much take it out immediately. So Swampert is a really, really nice mixed wall. You can do a lot of different things. You can run special attack investment if you want to hit really hard with the Hydro Pumps and the Volt Switches, or you can run it with more bulky sets if you want to be eating more hits. It's a very, very nice bulk on it. With Assault Vest, you definitely do lack that recovery, so you appreciate that Gorgeist support, but you can also run Leftovers on it pretty effectively. And there's a lot of potential moves this thing can run as well. It gets Earthquake, it gets Ice Beam, it gets Thunder Wave if you want paralysis support. There's a lot of things this mon can run. And it's definitely a Pokemon that could use a lot more experimentation. I've run that Assault Vest set quite a lot, but aside from that, this Pokemon hasn't been used a ton, so it definitely has potential for being better than we're giving it credit for at the moment. So definitely another Pokemon that I really appreciate seeing more of in the tournament. All right, next up we have the B- tier, and we'll start off with Aerodactyl. Now, Aerodactyl was added in Slate 1, and it used to be very, very meta-defining. But over time, a lot of Pokemon were added that do very well into it. Stuff like Ikaruf, stuff like Goldoco, Skeledirge is pretty good into it. So over time, it's become less valuable, but it's definitely still something that can be used pretty effectively. So what you usually want to run on this is Heavy Duty Boots with Intimidate, which combines with its very, very nice physical bulk to make it switch in well into pretty much any physical attacker, especially fighting types and bugs and ground types and other things that it naturally resists. But even things like Archeops that you would not expect it to switch in well to, it doesn't switch well into Stone Edge, but it can eat knockoff from a lot of different Pokemon and live to tell the tale. So depending on the circumstance, even if you get a prediction wrong, you can still make use of Aerodactyl, especially with that Intimidate ability. But usually you want to run Poltergeist. It does not have a good physical flying stab, so you don't really run it. But you do run U-Turn, Defog, Roost, and occasionally you'll swap out Defog or maybe U-Turn for Will-O-Wisp, which is nice into physical attackers as well, and can cripple even stuff like Archeops, which you may notice that despite hitting you with Stone Edge, you outspeed it. So that really, really fast Will-O-Wisp is pretty meta-defining, or at least it was in the past, because pretty much any offensive Pokemon on the physical side has to be wary of Aerodactyl because that Intim plus Will-O-Wisp pretty much shuts down every physical attacker. Nowadays, there's a lot more rock types, there's a lot more special attackers, stuff like Yeezult causes you big problems, but overall, it's still a strong, fast wall, the fastest wall, actually, faster than even very fast things like Ikaruf and Nurturaptor, and still a pretty effective Pokemon. Next up, we have Alta Combat. And this Pokemon definitely faces some strong competition from Archeops, but it does have a better speed tier, and it has Scrappy, which enables it to hit ghost types, and that's pretty major, again, in such a ghost-heavy meta. And so generally what you'll run on it, you can run Leftovers, but mostly you want to run an item that is easy to remove, such as Grassy Seed, or even no item at all, because what Alti Combat does best is Swords Dance sets with Close Combat and Acrobatics. And your last slot's pretty flexible. You can run Roost. You can potentially run Knockoff. There's a lot of different things you can run on this. You could even run U-Turn. I'm not huge on that, but it's definitely doable. And if you don't want to run Acrobatics, you do have Dual Wing Beat, but you don't have Brave Bird, so it's definitely something to be wary of. And so overall, this Pokemon is a pretty standard setup sweeper. It doesn't have great bulk, so you do have to be careful with running it. But this combination of moves is very hard to switch into for most teams, especially when you're at +2. So in late game, it's a really good cleaner. 120 speed is very impressive, even in this meta, only really outsped by the absolute speed ceilings. Aerodactyl is a major problem for you. You do have to get it off the board before you try to sweep with this, but thankfully Aerodactyl isn't as common in this meta as it used to be, so Alta Combat gets a lot more opportunities to go off. Next up, we have Brawlutra. This Pokemon is interesting. It's very similar to Armaldo in a lot of ways, but it does play pretty differently. It does have Swift Swim, but there is no rain in the meta, so that's not really relevant. What's much more relevant is Fur Coat, which combines with its 95 HP to create a very, very physically defensive Pokemon. Like I said, it's pretty much the Great Tusk of this meta. It has a lot of the tools that Great Tusk has. It has Close Combat, it has Headlong Rush, and it has Rapid Spin. Oh, it does not have Rapid Spin, I lied. But it does have Stealth Rock. The one interesting thing it gets, it loses Rapid Spin, but it gains Pivoting with Flip Turn. And so you can run something like this, and it's a fairly effective option as a utility Pokemon. But what folks have found is that defensive Brawlutra is not very good in this meta. Instead, what they use is Choice Scarf. And you can run Stealth Rock on this, but usually you want to run something like Knockoff or perhaps Stone Edge in order to hit Aerodactyl and similar Pokemon. And this is a much better set because it outspeeds a lot of Pokemon that you can really easily beat with Brawlutra. As you can see, Crobat hates Close Combat. Salazzle hates close combat. Yeezolt hates headlong rush, though you do have to be careful of first flight. And Flip Turn is generally pretty free into this meta. There's not a lot of really strong water resists, so it gets good chip damage over time, and knockoff as well. Brawlutra is a little inconsistent because it does have a lot of bad matchups, but overall it could definitely be run really effectively. And there's other sets as well that can be experimented with, such as Bulk Up. It has really, really good physical defense, so if you knock out the opponent's special threats, you can really easily rack up a huge amount of kills with Bulk Up sets, as well as gaining spikes and Stealth Rock in case you want to run hazards on it. So overall, pretty effective Pokemon, definitely has its downsides. Next up, we have Dracosaur. And this Pokemon kind of has twofold problems. The first problem is that it shares a typing with Skeledirge, who is probably the top Mon in the meta. And so there's definitely a lot of teams where you just won't run it because you're running Skeledirge. But aside from that, sorry, did I say Dracosaur? I meant Dracomizer. Dracomizer's biggest problem, though, is that it just has a lot of really common weaknesses for a physical wall, which is really unfortunate. It's very weak to ground. It's very weak to rock. It doesn't like knockoff because of that stealth rock weakness. But generally, what you'll want to run on it is heavy-duty boots with rough skin. If you're crazy, you can run Rocky Helmet, but I don't recommend that because you're going to be taking a lot of chip from Stealth Rock. And then you run something like Dragon Tail, its signature move, Tail Sear, which is an inverted Bolt Beak. So it deals more damage if you move after the target. And then you'll want to run something like Will-O-Wisp or Spikes and Slack Off. And this is a pretty standard Dracomizer set. It's extremely bulky on the physical side, so as long as the opponent doesn't have a super effective move into it, you can deal with their physical attackers pretty well. The biggest downside is definitely its poor matchups into certain meta Pokemon, but Will-O-Wisp can definitely help and catch off guard Pokemon like Rampardos and Archeops that think they can just switch in freely. So it's definitely a Pokemon that could use a bit more experimentation. It definitely has its downsides, but rough skin combined with amazing physical bulk does make it a pretty effective physical wall. And finally, for the B- tiers, we have Hemlophosaur. This Pokemon is interesting. It was added very recently, so it hasn't seen a huge amount of play. But basically what it does is pretty easy to understand. Similar to Gourgeist Small, it is a Swords Dance, not a Swords Dance Sweeper, I lied. This is another thing I'll need to bring up with the coder, seeing Solar Bleam here. But I could have sworn this thing got Swords Dance. Okay, so I just checked the spreadsheet, and it turns out I was wrong. This does not get Swords Dance. But it does get Hone Claws, which... Oh, no, sorry. What it gets is Dragon Dance. So it's a Dragon Dance Sweeper, and it can use its signature move, Hemlock Hit, which has a 30% poison chance, along with Gunk Shot and Earthquake. And this may seem a little weak for a Dragon Dance Sweeper, especially base 110 attack isn't huge even at +1. However, Hemlophosaur's big upside is Merciless, which makes it critical hit if the target is poisoned. This ability is really nice when both of your stabs have a 30% poison chance, and if you combine it with team support such as Toxic Spikes or Most Scourge, you can get crazy damage on even very bulky walls as long as they are poisoned. And so Hemlophosaur can really easily tear through teams in late game, but it definitely does need team support to get there, and it's not the most consistent option. This hasn't been tried yet, but I think it could also be good with a Choice Band set. It does not have access to U-Turn, however, it does have Knockoff, which is a nice fourth move to replace Dragon Dance with. It's not as consistent as some better options, but overall, it's definitely a Pokemon that can be used and can be used effectively. All right, getting into the final section now with the C tiers, we have Arctobis to start off. So Arctobis plays pretty interestingly because it is actually a slow ice type. However, it still performs pretty well. It has really, really high bulk. a solid 100 special attack, and a really strong signature ability, Permafrost, which turns water-type moves into ice-type, meaning you resist them. Only opposing water-type moves, so your own water-type moves do not become ice-type. And you gain +1 defense when you're hit by ice, which includes those now transformed water moves. So usually what you'll see on this is heavy-duty boots with Permafrost, and it runs Calm Mind sets, which means you have effectively a defensive double dance here with Permafrost and Calm Mind. If you get a defense boost and a couple Calm Minds, you can kind of tear apart the opponent, especially with Frigid Fin, which takes advantage of your low speed. It's the same as Tail Seer, and so it's stronger if you move last, making it almost 130 base power. And you also have Bitter Malice, which is only slightly weaker than Shadow Ball. I think you can realistically run Shadow Ball, or even you do not have Hex. So you can run Shadow Ball. You can also run Bitter Malice, which kind of gives you a double, like Permafrost gives you the defense boost, or you can use Bitter Malice to lower the opponent's attack. Either way, you're achieving the same effect, which is living longer and being able to recover off damage. And so basically, this is a bulkier setup sweeper type mon. It takes a lot to get going, and it definitely has some really bad matchups. Archeops, for example, is a big problem for it. Fire types in general, Skeledirge is a menace, especially with your Calm Mind. So you do have to get some Pokemon out of the way in order for this to be used effectively, but it can be a pretty scary mon in the right hands. So next up, we'll talk about Cardantis. This Pokemon used to be a lot stronger back when it had access to Magic Bounce, but thankfully it does not have that anymore. So now it is fairly niche. Cardantis is a normal ghost type, which in a ghost-dominated meta is pretty strong. It means you are a ghost type that beats other ghost types, which can be really, really nice. However, the biggest problem with it is just that its offenses are very low, which means it can struggle to pick up KOs, especially against more bulky Pokemon. Generally, what you want to run on this is Leftovers, and you can run Sharpness, you can run Misty Surge, either one is fine. I've personally run sets with Sharpness because you can run Swords Dance, you can run Poltergeist, and you can run Sacred Sword. And this with Sharpness is a really strong coverage move, and I'm sure everyone knows how good ghost fighting coverage is. So it's really, really effective. And then you can fill out in that last slot with, I know this gets recovery, I don't remember what recovery it gets. Morning Sun. Is that it? That is it. You can fill in that last slot with Morning Sun or Moonlight, whichever you prefer. And this is pretty effective as a sweeper. You probably want to run some speed on it, not necessarily full bulk investment, or maybe not a sweeper, more of a wall breaker. Because Poltergeist is very strong, even off of only base 88 attack, and it hits a lot of the meta super effectively. And Sacred Sword hits the dark types that would otherwise resist Poltergeist, as well as the normal types. But you do have to be afraid of Icarus and Caracosta, both of which don't really care about either of these moves, and can hit you back really hard with Soul Wind and Knockoff, respectively. Definitely not the easiest Pokemon to get going. There's a lot of other sets you could potentially run on this. It has Calm Mind, it has Bulk Up, it has so much coverage. It has Drain Punch, Earthquake, weird stuff like Explosion, Knockoff, Judgment for some reason. I can't explain it. Mach Punch, and multi-attack as well. Listen, I don't really agree with the design philosophy that went into this Pokemon, so don't complain to me about the weird moves it gets. I don't like its move pool very much. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It also gets Spikes, it gets Toxic, it gets Will-O-Wisp, plenty of annoying status Thunder Wave if you want to try doing that. It gets Sucker Punch, and it also gets Misty Surge if you want to run it as a more of a bulkier Pokemon. So there is actually more terrain in the meta than just Gourgeist. It's just that you very rarely run Cardantis, and when you do run it, you very rarely run Misty Surge on it. So it's definitely a niche option, but can be really useful, especially on stall teams, because that status immunity can really come in handy. So next up, we have Omastar. This is a Pokemon that for a very long time was very bad. but after recent buffs, it's become a little bit more usable. Usually what you'll want to use it for, the biggest problem is that it is a regenerator Pokemon that competes with Kabutops instead of pairing with it, which is a big problem when Kabutops is probably the single easiest Pokemon to slot onto a team because it eats up so much of the potential roles that Omastar could fill. However, the one thing Omastar does much better than Kabutops, and in fact better than anything else in the meta, is Future Sight. Omastar has a pretty solid 99 special attack, and with Future Sight, it can be absolutely a nightmare to deal with because there are very strong offensive Pokemon that pair extremely well with Future Sight, the biggest ones being Archeops and Yeezol. Both of these absolutely destroy the dark types that would want to switch in. You can also use something like Crobat, which doesn't mind dark types and absolutely annihilates psychic types. It is a very, very strong option on the right team builds. It can really, really effectively tear apart teams with that Future Sight support. And then generally, there's a lot of different things you can run. You can run Sludge Bomb, you can run Earth Power, you can run Knockoff. I will note that this does not get recovery. It also, I believe, does not get pivoting. So you are a little bit limited in what you can run with it, but you do also have access to Toxic Spikes, which is an interesting option because the poison types that would want to switch in and eat the Toxic Spikes don't like eating the Future Sight. The one exception to that being Caracosta, but that's what team support is for, right? So overall, this is a pretty bulky Pokemon. It can pivot into and eat a lot of hits thanks to Regenerator and its nice defensive typing. And generally, it can be usable as a defensive pivot and a Future Sight support. Next up, we have Pezbasil, our second steel type. There really are not that many steels in this meta. Pezbasil is a bulky steel ghost type with a really, really high 125 attack stat. It's a little bit confusing to run because it doesn't have any clearly defined role. You can run Heavy Metal if you would like. You can run Justified. You can run Own Tempo, which in my opinion is probably the best ability because it makes you immune to Intimidate from Aerodactyl and Armaldo. And with that, you can run Iron Head. If you're running Heavy Metal, you can run Heavy Slam. But generally, you want Iron Head, you want Shadow Bone, and you want Earthquake. And then the last slot is fairly open, but I think personally the best thing you can run on it is Shadow Sneak. And then you can run Leftovers, but you might also notice that you can run Assault Vest. And with this item, it can be an effective tank. 125 attack is very high, so there's a lot you can do with that. But generally, this Pokemon is a little bit awkward to run because it's not that good offensively. Its stabs are pretty weak. It's not that good defensively because its bulk is mediocre and it has no recovery. And its utility is pretty lacking. It has no hazards. Pretty much, its status move pool is absurdly shallow. There's nothing going on here. It's definitely a usable Pokemon. I think it's a little bit awkward to run, though, and I would not be surprised if this was a Pokemon that wasn't really seen in tournament that much, just because it's not very intuitive. But it can definitely be used, and it definitely has a lot of good matchups. It just takes a bit of getting used to. And finally, for the C+ tiers, we have Servacni. I'll just be upfront with you. There is one thing you run this for, and it is Sticky Web. Servacni is it has a high attack stat, a fine speed stat. Both of its abilities are only active in rain, and again, there is no rain setter, so basically it has no ability. So what you run on Servacni is Focus Sash, Sedimentary, or Swift Swim, it does not matter. You run Sticky Web, you run Stealth Rock, and the rest is filler. It doesn't matter. The only thing you're running this as is a Suicide Hazard lead with Sticky Web. Because webs are very strong in this meta due to how many Pokemon are very, very fast and how many mid-speed wall breakers there are that can just cleave through teams when given that speed boost. So generally for the last two slots, I will run Swords Dance and Stone Edge, just because Rock is a fairly strong coverage option in this meta, and it enables you to still be a threat even after you've set up your hazards. It forces the opponent to have to deal with you. But generally, the only thing that matters about Servacni is Sticky Web. Moving on to the C tiers, we will start off with the last two Gorgeists. We have regular, and we have, or I think they call it average, and then we have super. So we'll start with average here. Average is a stamina mon, actually, and this ability is interesting, but unfortunately it doesn't really work well on this Pokemon's kit. Most of the meta, at least that this thing wants to switch into, are special attackers, and most of the physical attackers have ways of getting around Gourgeist. There's a lot of offensive poison types, there's a lot of offensive flying types. It's just not the best option. You could definitely run it, and if you do run it, that attack is the higher offensive stat. So I would definitely run something like Swords Dance, maybe, with a similar set to Small. So you have your Power Whip, you have your Play Rough, you have your High Horsepower. This can potentially be fine. If you want to run it as a more defensive Pokemon, it does learn Synthesis, so you can definitely run like Power Whip, Play Rough, Synthesis, Toxic. This is a very reasonable set. You are very weak to steel types with this, so maybe you want to take advantage of that lower special attack just so that you can run Moonblast and Flamethrower. Do something similar to Gourgeist Large, where you can bait in Skeledirge and Toxicate. This Pokemon definitely could use some more experimentation, but I do think it has a lot of weaknesses into the meta, and it's just fairly inconsistent overall. Stamina is a strong ability, but this Pokemon just doesn't really have the toolset to abuse it effectively. And then for Gourgeist Super, this Pokemon is actually has Magic Guard, which is really, really strong in this meta. There's a lot of hazards, there's a lot of status. It's a great ability. And with Life Orb, you can really take advantage of it. Run something like Nasty Plot, 3 attacks, with your maybe Giga Drain, Moonblast, and Fire Blast. This hits most of the meta. The biggest problem with Gourgeist Super is that you can't really touch Skeledirge. And that's really, really annoying as a setup sweeper, because Skeledirge is, of course, an S tier unaware mon. And that's just majorly annoying for you. You can definitely get around it. For example, you could run Toxic, or you could have team support that deals with Skeledirge. But overall, Gourgeist Super is definitely pretty hard to run just because of how bad that Skeledirge matchup is. And there's other offensive or defensive Pokemon like Icaruff that also cause you problems. And again, it has similar weaknesses to Gourgeist Average in that there's a lot of offensive Pokemon, such as poison types, that really, really you struggle against. And with that 55 base speed, you're really forced to eat hits from them, which just can't happen with that 4 times poison weakness. So Gourgeist Super is definitely usable, but it's a bit of a struggle to run. Next up, we have Lapras. This was a very early addition, and it hasn't been used effectively in quite a while, but it definitely has a lot of positive traits. The biggest thing is its rough skin ability, combined with extremely good mixed bulk. 130, 85, 95 is insanely bulky on both sides. So you'll run it with leftovers. The Water Dark typing is pretty effective defensively, and you get a lot of utility moves. You get Scald, you get Knockoff, you also get Flip Turn, and most importantly, you actually get Recover. So you can really make the most of this bulk because you have Recovery in order to pair it with. The biggest problem with Lapras is kind of just competition and poor matchups into the top tiers. Yeezolt destroys you, Archeops destroys you, Crobat is a fine matchup, but again, that Night Watch ability is going to be making Earth Power do a lot of damage. You can't really touch Kabutops, and it annoys you back with Bloodstream. As Skeledirge is a pretty rough matchup as well. You can knock off its boots, but you can't really deal any meaningful damage to it. And generally, the meta just isn't super favorable to Lapras. I definitely think as the meta shifts during the tournament, this could definitely change. And Lapras isn't an inherently flawed Pokemon. I think it's just not in a very good spot in the meta. But overall, it's definitely an effective defensive mon and could see more usage in the future. Next up, we have Meganium. This is similar to Gourgeist Super in that it is a setup mon with Punk Rock that just cannot do anything into Skeledirge. You have your signature move Decibloom, which is similar to like Charge Beam, but it's a lot stronger. You have Overdrive. Both of these are boosted by Punk Rock. You also have Boom Burst, though personally, I would run Earth Power because it does more damage to Skeledirge. and gives you a better shot at defeating it. But the biggest problem with Meganium, as I mentioned, you can run Leftovers, you can run Throat Spray, but the biggest problem is just that this thing cannot get through Skeledirge. Even with Earth Power, you're not two-shotting, especially defensive Skeledirge, and it's very, very hard to break through it. And without doing that, you really just can't do anything into Skeledirge teams. And Caracosta is also a rough matchup. Earth Power helps with that one as well, but it can be really difficult to break through a Caracosta team as well, especially with those strong gunk shots doing very high damage to you. Meganium is definitely a usable Pokemon, but it's just kind of in a rough spot in the current meta. And finally, for the C tiers, we have Nurture Raptor. This is a Pokemon that could see more usage. It definitely has a lot of positive traits. That very high speed tier, Natural Cure is a good ability. You'll run it with Leftovers or Heavy Duty Boots. It gets a lot of utility. That's probably the biggest upside to Nurture Raptor. It gets Knockoff, it gets U-Turn. We talked about Wish earlier. That's also a fairly solid option on it. Though most likely you'll be running Soft Boiled for more consistent recovery. And this Pokemon's move pool is kind of insane. It gets so many interesting options. It gets Boom Burst, it gets Draco Meteor, it has Earth Power coverage, it gets Heal Bell, which is great for stall. It gets Lunar Dance, which is very interesting on such a fast Pokemon. I definitely could see some use in the future. It gets Toxic, which of course is great for the aforementioned Skeledirge, as well as other walls that might want to switch in on you, such as Caraguana. And it also gets Court Change, which is the only Pokemon in the entire meta to learn Court Change. So if you want that, you can definitely use Nurture Raptor. This is a Pokemon that I think we might be underrating because it definitely has a ton of unique traits. The biggest issue is just that its stat line is really, really awkward and kind of hard to work with. 85 special attack is pretty bad. Its bulk isn't good either. The only thing it really has going for it is that 119 speed tier, which I believe is the 4th fastest in the meta. It is indeed. So that's good. But it's kind of hard to run Nurture Raptor with all the other weaknesses it has, mainly in its stat line. And overall, it just hasn't been used effectively so far. So I'd love to see this thing used more in tournament. But for now, it's definitely on the weaker end. And finally, we get to the D tiers. These Pokemon, everything above, had an argument, a justification for being run. These ones are the lowest of the low. I struggle to come up with any reason to run them. Some of them have even received recent buffs and still are probably D tier. Hopefully I'm proven wrong in tournament. I would love to be. I think some of these Pokemon are really cool, but right now they are just very, very hard to use effectively and overall not the best. So first off, we have Bellibolt. This Pokemon was designed as an answer to Swishivish. The problem is that the same slate it won, Swampert won, and Swampert is a much better Swishivish answer while also being a better Pokemon all around. So Bellibolt is kind of just jobless. Electric Dark is a really awkward defensive typing. It makes you weak to U-Turn. It makes you weak to Fighting, which is one of the most common attacking types, and Ground, which is also one of the most common attacking types in this meta. You do get 3 really good abilities. Water Absorb is the most commonly used, but I can see an argument for Electromorphosis or Static. I mean, it's a Bellibolt. You know what it does. You usually run Leftovers, but you can also run Heavy Duty Boots. 103 special attack is pretty solid, and its bulk is good all around. So you can run all sorts of things. You can run Discharge. You can run Dark Pulse. You can run Volt Switch. You can run Toxic. This should not be here. You can run Slack Off, of course. And you can run stuff like Chilling Water. And it's an interesting Pokemon, Muddy Water as well. It's an interesting Pokemon all around, but it really struggles in this meta. It does have Nasty Plot, which is something that has not been messed with very much, but the problem again is really, really bad matchups into mons like Armaldo and Caracosta, who you really can't do anything to. And because of that, Bellibolt is just really hard to run effectively and doesn't see much usage. Next up, we have Conkeldurr. This is probably the least used Pokemon in the entire meta, outside of maybe Shivertherium, which we'll get to later. It's a very interesting Pokemon with kind of 2 attacking modes. It has both Pure Power and Punk Rock. Pure power sets are really underexplored. It has bulk up and a lot of physical coverage. Its physical move pool is massive. You have double edge for your normal typing. You have wave crash for your water typing, both very strong stabs. You have tons of coverage, knockoff, close combat, drain punch, earthquake. There's definitely a lot of options here, but the biggest problem is just that your speed tier is really bad and you're weak to a lot of common attackers. Again, Archeops, Yeezult. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but you're weak to both of them. And it's just really hard to get value out of Conkeldurr. I think maybe it's something that could see more usage and be better. You also could use Throat Spray with Punk Rock and maybe make use of the... You don't get Boom Burst, but you do get Hyper Voice. You also get Sparkling Aria. And those are definitely very strong options for Punk Rock sets. You also have Scorching Sands and Focus Blast for coverage. And Conkeldurr learns Defog for some reason, so that's interesting utility if you wanted to run that. But the biggest problem, again, is just you're very slow, you're very weak into top tiers, and it's kind of hard to get value out of Conkeldurr. So overall, despite having interesting traits, Conkeldurr is just very hard to run effectively. And overall, I would not recommend using it. But feel free to prove me wrong. I would love to see Conkeldurr be used. Next up, we have Heliolisk. Heliolisk is an old edition that just got worse and worse over time. It has Galvanize, which is great, a very strong ability. Usually you'll run heavy-duty boots, though you can try running Choice Band. The standard set would be Double Edge, Fire Lash, which it now learns, Quick Attack, and perhaps U-Turn. Volt Switch is risky because grounds are some of your best switch-ins, and you generally struggle into them, as well as Caracosta. So overall, you don't want to be running Volt Switch. Also, Venipleura is a big problem. But overall, this is the standard Heliolisk set. Fire Lash is an amazing wall-breaking tool, especially combined with Double Edge, and Quick Attack can be really useful for picking off faster offensive mons. But your awkward speed tier, putting you below most of the fastest offensive mons, combined with really, really bad bulk, and kind of meager initial attacking power. Stab Double Edge is really strong, but into electric resists, and especially into Skeledirge, you really, really struggle to deal meaningful damage. It can be hard to use Heliolisk. I think of all the D tiers, this is definitely the one that has the most potential. The biggest problem for it is definitely Skeledirge, because it resists both of your stabs and quad resists fire, making it really, really difficult to make progress into. But you are a burn immune physical attacker. Fire Lash is really good. Double Edge is really strong. U-Turn is great. Quick Attack is great. This is definitely a Pokemon you could use effectively. It just needs more experimentation. Next up, we have Salazzle. I'm going to be honest, this is probably the weakest Pokemon in the entire meta. Yeah. It has really good speed, base 114, and 108 special attack. So you might be thinking, well, what's wrong with this? Intimidate's good. This stat line's good. Why wouldn't you just run Nasty Plot and take names, you know? Maybe it's not the best, right? Its bulk isn't good, and it's a nice dark type, but, you know, I mean, it seems usable. Small problem. Yeah, so it had Nasty Plot removed. This Pokemon sucks. I don't even know what you would run on this. Heavy duty boots, but then you have no damage output. Choice specs, but then you're weak to rocks. Yeah. Its stabs aren't the greatest. I mean, Ice Dark is strong, but when your stabs are Ice Beam and Dark Pulse and you have 108 special attack, it's just not... It's kind of bouncing off any special wall. Stuff like Caracosta is a massive problem. You have interesting coverage. For some reason, this still learns Overheat. I imagine that was probably an oversight, but you might as well take advantage of it because this thing is so weak otherwise that it's going to be hard to do anything with it. It gets Will-O-Wisp, it gets Knockoff. Maybe you can make those work, but 60 base attack, you're not running physical on this. Yeah, this thing is really, really bad in this meta. You would not run it on a serious team. Next up, we have Shivertherium. This is another stamina Pokemon. Shockingly, there are 2 stamina users in the meta, and both of them aren't very good. Shivertherium is similar to Arctobus in that it is a slow ice type, but this one doesn't quite take advantage of that at all. Being an ice steel type gives you 4 times fire weakness and a 4 times fighting weakness, both of which are really rough. You have good physical bulk, and your physical attack is pretty good. 115 is very high even for this meta. Only outpaced by a couple other mons. But the biggest problem is just that fire weakness and that fighting weakness are both such massive issues in this meta. You can try to run like an offensive set with the other thing is that you don't get triple axle, and your best physical attacking ice type move is Mountain Gale, which is really rough. Um, and then you have Iron Head as a steel stab, so these are both very weak stab moves. You have Earthquake and High Horsepower if you're on a grassy terrain team, which could be good since you don't have recovery and you're a stamina abuser. So something like High Horsepower, and then maybe Body Press to take advantage of stamina. It's not the worst option. You could potentially use it. It has some good matchups, but this thing is just really hard to run effectively. Stamina, it's not good at using stamina because it doesn't eat hits very well. It's a ice steel type, which is very bad defensively and not very good offensively either. You can't deal with water types, which means Kabutops is a big problem. High horsepower hits it, but it also hits you back pretty hard since your special defense is pretty bad. This is just a very difficult Pokemon to run, and I would not recommend using it. Goldoko is better. Pesbasil is better. There's not really any reason to use it. And then finally, we have Sigilif. So Sigilif is interesting. It recently received a buff because Petroglyph was buffed. It used to only be a 50% chance to raise special attack. It is now a 100% chance. Tinted Lens is a great ability, of course. You can run Calm Mind sets on this with Earth Power and Psychic, or Psy Shock if you'd like, and Petroglyph, which hits a lot of the resist to your stabs, and also gives you a secondary boosting option. This is fine. You can also run Choice Specs or Choice Scarf. Your speed tier is unfortunately pretty awkward. It puts you below pretty much every good offensive mon, but without Choice Specs or a special attack boost from Calm Mind or Petroglyph, you're really not hitting that hard, even with Tinted Lens. So it can be really hard to break through opposing defensive cores with Sigilif if you're using a Choice Scarf set. And generally, it has good matchups. It's really nice into Archeops, especially. It can also do fine into Yeezalt, but the big problem again is First Flight. So Sigilif definitely has potential. It's not the worst Pokemon, but it's pretty hard to run effectively, and it's just there's better options for setup. If you want to run setup or Choice Specs, again, there's better options. This typing is unique offensively, but it just doesn't make full use of it. So yeah, that's it. That's a complete overview of the current Paleomons meta. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask me, I guess in the comments or on Discord, of course. This is pretty much a snapshot of the meta as of right before PetMod's Premier League. So I'm sure things will change in tournament. You know, maybe Rampardos becomes triple S tier. You know, maybe it turns out that Caraguana is actually terrible. Who knows, right? Anything could happen. But I'm really looking forward to seeing this mod get played in a high-level tournament setting, and I really hope you all enjoy playing it. So yeah, thank you very much.